self-mastery, the hidden power that lies in the choice of not reacting. The journey so far has been about learning, understanding, and applying principles of self-control, but now the full picture comes together as a cocker, the framework of the entire book, allowing the listener to feel as though they are standing at the edge of a clear river, able to see both the depth of the waters and the path across. Safety R1. The journey toward mastering the art of not reacting begins with a deep and honest understanding of the human condition, of how life continuously tests us with situations, people, and circumstances that have the power to stir emotions we often struggle to control. And the first step in this journey is awareness, the ability to recognize that emotions, while natural and inevitable, do not have to dictate our actions or define who we are. For every human being experiences anger, frustration, anxiety, and fear. Yet the difference between those who live in constant turmoil and those who maintain inner peace lies not in the absence of these emotions, but in the capacity to observe them, to feel them without surrendering to them, to acknowledge their presence while keeping a sense of calm and control. And in this chapter, we begin to build the foundation of emotional mastery by exploring the profound power that comes from simply noticing, from pausing in the midst of an emotional surge before allowing the impulse to take control. Because most people live their lives as reactors rather than responders, moving through the world with automatic patterns, instantly lashing out at perceived insults, immediately pushing back against challenges, and allowing anger or fear to dictate decisions. But the person who chooses the path of awareness recognizes that the first sign of emotional turbulence is the precise moment to reclaim power, to step back, to create a mental space in which deliberate choice can emerge. And imagine for a moment, standing in the center of a storm, the wind whipping, the rain lashing, the chaos surrounding you, yet your mind remains clear, your heart steady, and your body relaxed. And this image, as simple as it may seem, illustrates the essence of what it means to not react. Because the external circumstances have not changed, the storm is still raging, but within you, a different reality exists, a space where clarity, composure, and deliberate action are possible. And in everyday life, these storms may take the form of a co-worker who speaks sharply, a friend who betrays trust, a stranger who cuts you off in traffic, or a loved one who unintentionally hurts your feelings. Yet each of these moments is not a mandate to react. It is an invitation to exercise choice. And this choice, though seemingly small in the moment, accumulates over time to create a profound transformation in character, in peace of mind, and in personal power. For when you pause, even for a single breath, before responding to provocation, you interrupt the automatic cycle of reaction that has enslaved so many people to their impulses. And in that pause, you find the ability to respond thoughtfully, to speak with intention, and to act with wisdom rather than being a puppet of circumstance. And the process begins by understanding that emotions are not enemies, they are signals, indicators that something is happening within us or around us that deserves attention. Yet the true mastery lies in acknowledging these signals without immediately acting upon them, in observing them as passing currents within the mind, waves that rise and fall, sometimes violently, sometimes gently, but always temporary. And the person who learns to ride these waves without being swept away discovers a freedom that those who react unconsciously cannot fathom. Because the reactive mind is trapped in a loop, constantly reacting to stimuli, feeding anger with anger, fear with fear, frustration with frustration, while the conscious mind, the mind trained to pause and observe, creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space lies the power to choose, the power to maintain dignity, the power to preserve relationships, and the power to direct life in accordance with personal values rather than the whims of circumstance. And awareness, while seemingly simple, requires consistent practice, because the human brain is wired for reaction, for immediate action, for survival, And breaking this pattern demands patience, mindfulness, and courage. The courage to stand still in the face of provocation, to resist the urge to defend, to correct, or to lash out. And in this chapter, we explore techniques to cultivate such awareness, from mindful breathing to self-reflection, to observing physical sensations that signal the rise of strong emotions, to noticing thoughts as they appear and acknowledging them without judgment. For these techniques allow the listener to recognize the exact moment when a reaction is forming and to choose a different path, a path of intentionality, calm, and strength. And as the chapter unfolds, it becomes clear that this practice is not passive, it is active, deliberate, and transformative. For each pause builds resilience, each conscious choice reinforces the capacity to respond wisely, and each moment of control strengthens the foundation for the chapters that follow, illustrating that the power of not reacting is not a theoretical concept, but a practical skill that can be learned, applied, and perfected over time. And in living this principle, life begins to shift, because the storms remain. But the inner experience changes, challenges become opportunities, conflicts become lessons, and the individual begins to navigate life with a sense of freedom, dignity, and inner strength, and is unshaken by the chaos of the world. And by the end of this chapter, the listener understands that emotional mastery begins with awareness, that every emotional surge is a chance to practice, and that in choosing not to react, one steps onto the path of true power, a power that transforms not just reactions but life itself. And the journey, though continuous, begins here, with the simple yet profound act of noticing, pausing, and choosing. For in that choice lies the first spark of freedom, the first step toward mastery, and the first lesson in the lifelong art of controlling one's emotions, not by denying them, not by suppressing them, but by observing, understanding, and responding with deliberate wisdom. And this is where the foundation of the book is laid, the framework established, the cocker drawn, setting the stage for the chapters ahead, as the reader or listener begins to embrace the profound truth that the power to remain calm, composed, and unreactive is the power to live free, the power to navigate life with clarity, and the power to become the master of one's own emotional universe. CHTR2. As we move deeper into the journey of mastering emotional control, we encounter the concept of triggers, those hidden forces in life that set off reactions within us often before we are even consciously aware. And understanding these triggers is essential because they reveal the patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that govern much of our daily experience. For life is filled with circumstances, interactions, and challenges that provoke irritation, anger, frustration, and fear. And without the awareness of what causes these reactions, we remain at the mercy of external events, reacting automatically to every slight insult, inconvenience, or disappointment. Yet the person who seeks mastery recognizes that every trigger is an opportunity to exercise choice, to step back, and to pause before responding, because triggers are not inherently powerful. Their power lies in the way we allow them to affect us. And by cultivating awareness of these triggers, we gain the ability to interrupt automatic responses and create space for thoughtful, deliberate action. And in this chapter, the listener is invited to explore how triggers operate in both obvious and subtle ways, from overt provocations such as a rude remark from a colleague or a harsh word from a loved one, to more subtle triggers such as a fleeting thought, an unfulfilled expectation, or an unconscious memory that surfaces in a moment of stress, all of which have the potential to provoke reaction if we are not attentive. And the first step in managing triggers is recognition, the ability to notice the rise of emotion within the body, the tightening of muscles, the quickening of the heart, the racing of the mind, because these physical and mental cues are early indicators that a reaction is forming. And when observed consciously, they allow the individual to step into the role of observer rather than reactor, to witness the emotion as it emerges without immediately giving it power over action. And this chapter emphasizes that mastery of triggers is not about suppressing feelings or pretending that provocations do not exist. Rather, it is about building a deliberate response that preserves composure, dignity, and clarity. For when a person learns to pause in the face of provocation, they no longer hand their power to circumstance or to the people around them, but reclaim it, demonstrating self-mastery and resilience in every interaction. And to illustrate this principle, the chapter presents examples from daily life. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and instead of honking, swearing, or making angry gestures, you take a deep breath, recognize the surge of frustration, and choose to let it pass, realizing that the other driver's behavior does not define your peace. A colleague takes credit for your work, and instead of reacting with confrontation or resentment, you pause, assess the situation, and decide on a response that maintains professionalism and strengthens your position without creating unnecessary conflict. A family member says something hurtful, and instead of lashing out or retreating into silence, you recognize the emotional trigger, acknowledge your feelings internally, and respond calmly, fostering understanding rather than escalation. And through these practical illustrations, the chapter conveys that triggers are not obstacles, but opportunities to practice restraint, to cultivate awareness, and to strengthen the habit of choosing response over reaction. And the chapter further explores the psychological mechanisms that make triggers so powerful, explaining how past experiences, unresolved emotions, and ingrained thought patterns create automatic reactions, often without conscious thought. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we gain insight into the root of our impulses, allowing us to disentangle the present moment from the baggage of the past. And in doing so, we realize that no external event has the power to control us unless we permit it, and this understanding is liberating because it shifts the focus from blaming circumstances or people to taking responsibility for our own emotional state, which is the essence of mastery, the core principle that this book seeks to instill. And the chapter emphasizes that developing this skill is a practice, one that requires repeated application in real-life situations, from minor annoyances to major conflicts. For each pause, each conscious choice to observe rather than react strengthens the neural pathways that enable calm, thoughtful action, gradually transforming the individual from someone who is controlled by triggers to someone who navigates life with composure, clarity, and a resilience. And in this process, patience becomes a vital companion, because awareness of triggers is only effective when paired with the willingness to wait, to resist the urge for immediate action, and to allow time for reason and wisdom to guide decisions. And as the chapter progresses, it encourages the listener to create a mental practice of anticipating triggers, imagining potential situations that could provoke emotional responses, and rehearsing deliberate, composed reactions, because the mind trained in advance is less likely to be hijacked by sudden provocation. And the chapter concludes with the profound realization that triggers, while inevitable, do not have to dictate our behavior, and that the deliberate choice to observe, pause, and respond rather than react is the gateway to freedom, the foundation of emotional mastery, and the first tangible step toward living a life in which inner peace, resilience, and clarity govern our interactions, relationships, and decisions, demonstrating that mastery over one's own triggers is not just a skill but a transformative approach to life. A practice that, when cultivated consistently, empowers us to navigate the storms of emotion with grace, patience, and unwavering self-control, creating a reality where external circumstances no longer define the quality of our inner world. Chapter 3. In this chapter, we delve deeply into the nature of anger, one of the most powerful and immediate emotions that challenges our ability to maintain composure, because anger, unlike other emotions that may rise slowly, often erupts suddenly. sweeping through the mind and body with the intensity of a wildfire, prompting reactions that are instinctive, sometimes destructive, and rarely productive if left unchecked. And understanding anger is crucial to mastering the art of not reacting, for it is in the moments of emotional intensity that our character is most tested, and the choices we make define who we are, who we become, and how our relationships and opportunities unfold. Anger can be triggered by real offenses, perceived slights, unmet expectations, or even internal frustrations that are projected onto the world. Yet the critical realization is that anger itself is not the enemy. It is a signal, a messenger, a reflection of what matters to us, and its presence provides an opportunity to exercise conscious control rather than be controlled by it. And in exploring the anatomy of anger, we discover that it manifests physically through tension in the muscles, accelerated heartbeat, shallow or rapid breathing, a surge of adrenaline, and heightened alertness, all of which prepare the body for action. Yet these same responses, if acted upon impulsively, can lead to words spoken in haste, decisions made in the heat of the moment, and conflicts escalated unnecessarily, thereby creating consequences that extend far beyond the initial trigger. Understanding the physiological and psychological components of anger allows us to recognize the early signs of its emergence, and with this recognition comes the power to intervene before reaction takes over, because the moment before response is the critical window where choice resides. And when we pause to observe the emotion, breathe deeply, and gain clarity, we step into a higher realm of control, transforming anger from a destructive force into a teacher, revealing not only our vulnerabilities, but also our capacity for growth, patience, and strength. And this chapter illustrates that anger often disguises itself as justification, righteousness, or the need for immediate action, convincing us that speaking first, acting fast, or asserting dominance will resolve the issue. Yet history, both personal and collective, shows that uncontrolled anger rarely produces lasting solutions and often exacerbates the very problems it seeks to address, whereas restraint, thoughtful reflection, and deliberate response cultivate respect, understanding, and constructive outcomes. And through numerous examples, from workplace conflicts to personal disputes, the chapter demonstrates how individuals who have learned to pause in moments of anger can navigate challenging situations with wisdom, maintain relationships, and preserve their integrity, while those who react impulsively often suffer regret, damaged connections, and unnecessary stress. The chapter also explores the mental dialogue that accompanies anger, the stories we tell ourselves that amplify emotional intensity, such as imagining insult where none was intended, recalling past injustices to justify present frustration, or projecting fears of inadequacy onto perceived slights. And by becoming aware of these internal narratives, we create the opportunity to intervene, reframe, and choose a different path. For awareness of thought patterns is as crucial as awareness of physiological responses, and the integration of both forms of observation forms the foundation for true mastery over anger. And the chapter provides practical strategies to manage and channel anger constructively, including conscious breathing techniques, mental reframing, mindfulness practices, temporary physical withdrawal from provocative situations, and reflective journaling, all of which serve to interrupt automatic responses and cultivate deliberate, empowered reactions. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery of anger is not achieved by suppressing it or pretending it does not exist, but by acknowledging its presence, understanding its origin, and consciously directing its energy toward solutions rather than destruction. Furthermore, this chapter highlights that anger, when properly managed, can become a source of insight, motivation, and empowerment, revealing personal boundaries, values, and unmet needs, and guiding us to make choices that align with our long-term goals and emotional well-being. And the individuals who embrace this perspective learn to transform potentially volatile encounters into opportunities for communication, understanding, and personal growth, and in doing so, they experience a freedom that those who react unconsciously cannot, because uncontrolled anger binds the mind and body to impulses, whereas mastery over anger liberates energy, preserves relationships, and enhances clarity in decision-making. Ultimately, the chapter reinforces that the power of not reacting is most visible and impactful in the moments when anger threatens to take over, and through awareness, patience, reflection, and deliberate choice, we create a life in which emotions inform rather than control us, where challenges become opportunities to demonstrate strength rather than weaknesses, and where the ability to remain calm and composed becomes a defining trait of character, influence, and inner peace. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice recognizing the earliest signs of anger, pausing intentionally, and responding thoughtfully, understanding that each moment of restraint is a step toward mastery. Each deliberate response strengthens the capacity for self-control, and each encounter handled with calm wisdom builds a foundation for a life guided by clarity, dignity, and the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that true strength lies not in the expression of anger, but in the choice to observe, understand, and respond with conscious intentionality rather than impulsive reaction. Chapter 4. In this chapter, we turn our focus to fear, an emotion as pervasive and powerful as anger, yet often more subtle, whispering quietly into our consciousness, influencing decisions, and shaping perceptions and prompting reactions before we even realize we are under its sway. And understanding fear is crucial to mastering the art of not reacting, because while anger erupts explosively and demands immediate attention, fear often works in the shadows, creating hesitation, anxiety, self-doubt, and the compulsion to act preemptively or defensively. And the first step in managing fear is recognition, the ability to notice the physiological and mental signs that signal its presence. For fear often manifests as tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, rapid heartbeat, a knot in the stomach, or a racing mind filled with worst-case scenarios, and these indicators, when observed consciously, provide a crucial window for intervention, allowing the individual to step back, pause, and choose response over reaction. And this chapter emphasizes that the power of not reacting lies in the ability to witness fear without surrendering to it, to feel its presence without letting it dictate action, and to transform its energy into calm awareness, deliberate thought, and constructive behavior, because fear, when unmanaged, can lead to avoidance, overreaction, conflict, indecision, and missed opportunities. Yet, when observed with clarity, it becomes a teacher, revealing the areas of life that matter most, the vulnerabilities that need attention, and the values that require alignment. And through vivid examples, the chapter illustrates how fear manifests in everyday situations. A person hesitates to speak up in a meeting due to fear of judgment, a driver panics when navigating through heavy traffic, a parent worries excessively over a child's safety, a student dreads an exam or performance. And in each case, the instinctive reaction is often counterproductive, leading to stress, poor decision-making, and emotional turmoil. But by pausing to recognize the rise of fear, breathing deeply, grounding oneself in the present moment, and observing the emotion as a passing current rather than an absolute command, individuals regain control, maintain composure, and respond thoughtfully. And the chapter also explores the psychological mechanisms that amplify fear, including past experiences, perceived threats, negative self-talk, and the mind's tendency to anticipate worst-case scenarios. And by bringing these influences into conscious awareness, we can disentangle the present situation from the echoes of past trauma or imagined danger, creating space for deliberate, rational, and calm responses. And the chapter provides practical techniques for managing fear, including mindfulness practices, visualization, cognitive reframing, controlled breathing, and temporary withdrawal from high-pressure situations, all of which serve to interrupt automatic reactions and cultivate intentional action. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over fear is not about eliminating the emotion, which is impossible and unnecessary, but about cultivating awareness, self-discipline, and resilience, recognizing fear as a natural signal that requires attention but does not demand surrender. And this mastery transforms the way we interact with life, allowing us to move forward despite uncertainty, to communicate effectively despite anxiety, and to act decisively even in the face of potential danger. And the chapter further illustrates that fear, when approached with awareness and intentionality, can become a source of insight and empowerment, teaching us what we value most, where our boundaries lie, and what areas of life require courage. And by responding rather than reacting, we preserve energy, maintain clarity, and strengthen confidence, gradually replacing automatic responses with deliberate choices. And over time, this practice reshapes the mind, rewiring habitual patterns that once fueled avoidance, overreaction, or unnecessary worry, and instead cultivating resilience, composure, and inner strength. And the chapter highlights that the moments of greatest growth often arise when fear is present, because each pause, each conscious breath, each decision to observe rather than act impulsively reinforces the capacity to remain calm, rational, and centered. And this process, though challenging, becomes a powerful exercise in building character, emotional intelligence, and personal freedom. And ultimately, the chapter conveys that the power of not reacting is most profoundly exercised in the presence of fear, because fear tempts us to surrender control, to act hastily, or to escape. Yet by choosing to pause, reflect, and respond with deliberate thought, we transform the experience of fear from a source of limitation into an opportunity for mastery, self-awareness, and empowerment, demonstrating that true freedom comes not from the absence of fear, but from the ability to remain calm, composed, and intentional in the face of it. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing fear as it arises, acknowledging it without judgment, breathing deeply to create space between emotion and action, and responding thoughtfully with wisdom and courage, understanding that each moment of restraint strengthens resilience. Each deliberate response builds confidence, and each encounter with fear handled mindfully deepens mastery over one's emotional life, showing that the choice to not react is the gateway to clarity, peace, and the transformative power of emotional self-control. See FTR 5. In this chapter, we explore the pervasive emotion of frustration, a subtle yet powerful force that seeps into everyday life and challenges our ability to maintain calm and composure. Because frustration arises when reality fails to meet our expectations, when plans go awry, when people behave differently than we hope, or when circumstances seem to conspire against our desires. And although frustration may seem minor compared to anger or fear, it is relentless, cumulative, and capable of shaping behavior, clouding judgment, and draining energy over time. And understanding its nature is crucial for mastering the art of not reacting, because frustration often triggers automatic responses such as irritation, impatience, complaining, blaming, or withdrawal, which not only fail to resolve the underlying issue but also perpetuate stress and conflict. Yet, by cultivating awareness of frustration as it emerges, we create an opportunity to choose restraint and deliberate action instead of surrendering to impulse. And this chapter emphasizes that the first step in managing frustration is recognition, the ability to notice the subtle signs of tension in the body, the racing thoughts, the clenching of the jaw, the rise in internal agitation. And by acknowledging these signals, we interrupt the automatic cycle that would otherwise lead to reactive behavior. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how frustration manifests in daily life. A driver stuck in traffic grows tense and begins to honk, muttering complaints under their breath. A co-worker misses a deadline, prompting impatience and harsh internal criticism. A family member forgets a promise, triggering irritation and resentment. And in each of these scenarios, the reactive response is instinctive and often destructive, Yet by pausing to observe the emotion, taking a deliberate breath, and reflecting on the bigger picture, the individual gains clarity and can respond with composure, patience, and constructive action. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms behind frustration, explaining how unmet expectations, a sense of loss of control, and habitual thinking patterns amplify the intensity of the emotion. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we empower ourselves to detach from the automatic need to react and instead cultivate responses that align with reason, values, and long-term goals. And the chapter also emphasizes the importance of perspective, encouraging the listener to step back from the immediate moment, to consider the broader context, and to recognize that not every inconvenience, disappointment, or obstacle warrants a reactive response, because when we constantly respond to minor frustrations, we deplete our energy, compromise our peace of mind, and strain relationships unnecessarily, whereas choosing to pause and respond deliberately allows us to preserve emotional energy, maintain clarity, and navigate life with greater effectiveness. And the chapter provides practical strategies to manage frustration, including mindfulness practices, controlled breathing, cognitive reframing, and the cultivation of patience, all of which help to transform frustration from a destructive impulse into a signal for self-reflection, problem-solving, and personal growth. And the chapter further explores how repeated practice of observing frustration without reacting gradually rewires the mind, creating new neural pathways that support calm, deliberate behavior. And over time, the individual experiences a profound shift in how challenges are perceived and addressed, developing resilience, self-discipline, and a sense of inner peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. And the chapter highlights that frustration, when approached with awareness and intentionality, can reveal important lessons about personal expectations, boundaries, priorities, and the areas of life that require adjustment or acceptance. And by responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively, we align our actions with wisdom rather than emotion, and in doing so, we cultivate not only emotional mastery, but also stronger relationships, better decision-making, and increased confidence in navigating life's inevitable challenges. And the chapter emphasizes that the choice to pause in the face of frustration is an act of empowerment, a deliberate reclaiming of personal agency, and a practice that strengthens the capacity to maintain calm and clarity, even under pressure, because each moment of restraint demonstrates self-control, builds mental resilience, and reinforces the principle that our power lies not in changing external circumstances, but in mastering our internal responses. And ultimately, the chapter conveys that the power of not reacting is most evident in how we handle daily irritations and obstacles, where habitual reactivity can dominate the mind and dictate behavior. Yet through conscious practice, awareness, and patience, we transform frustration into an ally rather than an enemy, a teacher rather than a tormentor, and a guide that shows us the path to emotional strength, composure, and freedom. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is encouraged to practice observing frustration as it arises, to pause, breathe, and reflect, to respond with deliberate thought rather than impulsive action, and to recognize that each choice to maintain calm strengthens mastery over one's emotional life, demonstrating that the ability to not react is the gateway to clarity, resilience, and the enduring peace that comes from self-control, patience, and intentional living. And this practice, though subtle and often overlooked, lays a foundation for navigating the more intense emotions explored in the chapters that follow, ultimately guiding the individual toward a life governed not by impulse, but by conscious, empowered choice. Chapter 6. In this chapter, we explore the transformative power of mindfulness in cultivating emotional control and the ability to not react, because awareness alone, though essential, is insufficient without the deliberate practice of attention and presence. And mindfulness provides the framework for observing emotions, thoughts, and bodily sensations as they arise without judgment, without suppression, and without automatic response, allowing us to create a space between stimulus and reaction, a space in which conscious choice can flourish, and the essence of mindfulness lies in its simplicity and consistency, in the practice of noticing what is happening in the present moment with clarity and acceptance, whether it is the tightness of the chest signaling anger, the rapid heartbeat accompanying fear, the mental chatter fueled by frustration, or the subtle irritations that accumulate unnoticed. And by observing these phenomena attentively, we gain insight into the internal patterns that drive reactive behavior, transforming the mind from a slave of impulses into a master of conscious action. And the chapter emphasizes that mindfulness is not merely a meditation practice removed from daily life. It is a continuous awareness applied to every interaction, every challenge, every moment of emotional intensity, whether in the workplace, at home, on the road, or in social situations. For when we practice mindfulness consistently, the habit of pausing before reacting becomes natural, and the automatic, often destructive cycles of thought and emotion are gradually replaced with deliberate, considered responses. And the chapter provides vivid illustrations of this process. In action, a manager receives harsh criticism from a superior, and instead of reacting defensively or angrily, pauses, notes the bodily and mental responses, breathes deeply, and responds with clarity and professionalism. A parent faces a child's tantrum, and instead of losing patience or shouting, observes their own rising frustration, maintains composure, and guides the child calmly, demonstrating both authority and empathy. A commuter experiences rude behavior on the road, and rather than engaging in conflict, notices the surge of irritation, breathes, and chooses a neutral response, preserving inner calm. And these examples demonstrate that mindfulness transforms ordinary moments of provocation into opportunities to exercise emotional mastery, turning potential chaos into deliberate action. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms by which mindfulness cultivates this control, explaining how the mind's habitual reactivity is often unconscious, fueled by past experiences, ingrained thought patterns, and survival instincts. And by bringing attention to these impulses, we interrupt automatic processes, allowing reason, empathy, and discernment to guide behavior. And through consistent practice, mindfulness strengthens the neural pathways that support calm, intentional responses, gradually reshaping the brain's default mode from reaction to reflection. And the chapter also highlights the profound impact of breath awareness as a cornerstone of mindfulness, illustrating how conscious breathing acts as an anchor, slowing the physiological surge associated with strong emotions, creating a bridge between the emotional reaction and the rational response, and enabling individuals to act from clarity rather than impulse. And in addition to breath, the chapter introduces techniques such as body scanning, noting sensations without judgment, observing thoughts as passing events rather than absolute truths, and labeling emotions as they arise, all of which cultivate detachment from immediate reaction, foster self-awareness, and enhance the ability to maintain composure under pressure. And the chapter emphasizes that mindfulness is not about denying emotions or pretending that provocation does not exist, but about acknowledging their presence, understanding their source, and choosing responses that align with wisdom and values, because the mastery of emotional life is not found in suppression, but in observation, understanding, and intentional action. And over time, these practices develop resilience, patience, and an inner sense of peace that remains unshaken even in the face of chaos, conflict, or unexpected challenges. And the chapter further explores how mindfulness enhances empathy, compassion, and relational intelligence, because by observing our own emotional responses without judgment, we become better attuned to the experiences and feelings of others, responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively, and creating deeper, more meaningful connections in both personal and professional contexts. And the chapter also emphasizes that mindfulness is cumulative, building strength and insight over time, as each moment of deliberate awareness reinforces the habit of responding rather than reacting, gradually transforming the individual from someone governed by impulses to someone guided by clarity, wisdom, and self-control. And in doing so, we experience the profound freedom that comes from mastering our inner world, realizing that, while we cannot always control external events, we can control how we respond to them, and this conscious control is the essence of not reacting, the ultimate form of empowerment. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to incorporate mindfulness into daily life through consistent practice, observing emotions, thoughts, and bodily sensations with patience and curiosity, pausing before responding, and allowing clarity, discernment, and intentionality to guide actions, understanding that each moment of mindful awareness strengthens emotional mastery, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of choosing response over reaction, demonstrating that the deliberate practice of mindfulness is not merely a tool, but a way of living, a foundation for navigating life with composure, insight, and lasting inner peace. Chapter 7. In this chapter, we delve into the pervasive challenge of impatience, an emotion that often masquerades as urgency, driving people to react impulsively, make hasty decisions, and sacrifice clarity for the illusion of immediate action. Because impatience is fueled by the mind's desire for instant results, immediate gratification, or quick resolution of discomfort, and when left unchecked, it undermines our ability to respond thoughtfully, erodes relationships, and creates unnecessary stress. Yet understanding the nature of impatience is the first step toward mastery, because by recognizing its presence, we can interrupt its automatic pull and reclaim control over our responses. And the chapter emphasizes that impatience is not merely an external reaction to circumstances, but often a reflection of internal patterns of expectation, restlessness, and fear of loss, discomfort, or missed opportunities. And by bringing these patterns into conscious awareness, we gain insight into why we feel compelled to act hastily, and how these impulses affect both our decision-making and our interactions with others. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how impatience manifests in everyday life. A manager demands immediate results from a team without considering capacity or process, prompting stress and tension. A commuter grows frustrated in traffic, reacting with anger or aggressive driving. A parent pushes a child to achieve faster, responding to impatience rather than the child's pace. A professional becomes anxious about slow progress on a project, rushing decisions and creating mistakes, and in each of these situations, the instinctive reaction is often destructive, whereas pausing to observe the rising impatience, breathing deeply, and reflecting on priorities, context, and long-term goals transforms the moment into an opportunity for intentional, measured action. And the chapter looks at ethicalisms that underpin impatience, including the brain's reward-seeking tendencies, habitual thought patterns, and attachment to outcomes. And by recognizing these mechanisms, we can consciously shift perspective, slowing the reflex to react, and cultivating patience as a deliberate practice. Because patience is not passive, it is an active engagement of awareness, reflection, and self-control that enables thoughtful action rather than reaction. And the chapter provides practical techniques for managing impatience, including mindful breathing to anchor attention, reframing expectations to focus on process rather than immediate outcomes, prioritizing tasks to reduce perceived urgency, and visualizing calm, deliberate responses, all of which strengthen the capacity to act intentionally even in high-pressure situations. And the chapter emphasizes that repeated practice of pausing before responding gradually rewires the mind, creating neural pathways that support patience, clarity, and deliberate action. And over time, individuals who master this skill experience profound benefits, including improved decision-making, reduced stress, enhanced relationships, and the ability to navigate challenges with composure, confidence, and strategic thinking. And the chapter further highlights how impatience often leads to unnecessary conflict, because reactive behavior provoked by the desire for immediate resolution can escalate misunderstandings, damage trust, and provoke reciprocal reactions, whereas the deliberate choice to pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully preserves dignity, strengthens influence, and fosters constructive outcomes. And the chapter also explores the interplay between impatience and other emotions, such as frustration, anger, and anxiety, illustrating how these emotions often amplify each other, creating a feedback loop that drives impulsive behavior, and how mindfulness, self-awareness, and conscious choice break this cycle, allowing the individual to regain control and act in alignment with values and long-term goals. And the chapter emphasizes that mastering impatience is not about suppressing emotion or disengaging from life, but about cultivating awareness, restraint, and intentionality, creating a foundation for consistent, measured responses in the face of provocation, delays, or discomfort. And in doing so, we develop resilience, emotional intelligence, and the capacity to navigate life's challenges with skill and composure. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed impatience into patience, demonstrating that the ability to pause, reflect, and choose action rather than react is a hallmark of emotional mastery, leadership, and personal strength. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in immediate action or forced resolution, but in deliberate, thoughtful response. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is encouraged to practice observing the signs of impatience as they arise, to breathe, create mental space, reflect on priorities and values, and respond intentionally rather than impulsively, understanding that each act of restraint strengthens the mind, cultivates resilience, and deepens mastery over emotions, ultimately demonstrating that the power of not reacting is most clearly exercised in the moments when impatience tempts us to surrender control, because in choosing patience over impulse, we create clarity, composure, and the enduring capacity to navigate life with wisdom, confidence, and inner peace. And the consistent application of these principles forms a foundation for emotional freedom, transforming ordinary moments of discomfort into opportunities for growth, self-mastery, and the profound ability to act with intention rather than react on autopilot. Chapter 8. In this chapter, we explore the intricate and often overlooked influence of pride on emotional reactivity, because pride, though often considered a positive trait associated with self-respect and accomplishment, can subtly fuel reactions that undermine composure, cloud judgment, and strain relationships. And understanding pride is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it often manifests as defensiveness, stubbornness, the need to be right, or the compulsion to assert superiority. And when triggered, it can lead to arguments, resentment, and impulsive behavior that conflicts with long-term goals and personal integrity. And the chapter emphasizes that pride, in its reactive form, is not merely about self-esteem, but about ego-driven responses to perceived slights, criticism, or challenges to personal identity. And by becoming aware of how pride influences thoughts and emotions, we create the opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose deliberate, thoughtful responses rather than surrendering to automatic defensive impulses. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how pride often triggers reactions in everyday life. A colleague dismisses an idea in a meeting, prompting the desire to retaliate or assert superiority. A friend unintentionally offends, and pride fuels defensiveness or withdrawal. A family member questions a decision, provoking irritation or argument. And in each case, the instinctive response is often reactive and destructive, whereas pausing to observe the rise of ego-driven emotion, reflecting on the situation objectively, and choosing a measured response transforms the moment into an opportunity for emotional mastery, growth, and relational harmony. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms behind pride, driven reactions, explaining how the ego, past experiences, and attachment to identity create automatic impulses that demand validation, recognition, or defense. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we gain the capacity to respond with humility, composure, and clarity, because recognizing that perceived slights often reflect the other person's perspective rather than an absolute truth reduces the grip of pride on our emotions and choices. And the chapter for wise practical strategies to manage pride, including self-reflection, mindfulness, reframing perceived offenses, cultivating humility, and focusing on solutions rather than defending status or ego, all of which serve to interrupt automatic reactions and foster thoughtful, intentional behavior. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over pride is not about diminishing self-worth, denying accomplishments, or suppressing confidence, but about separating identity from reaction, observing emotional impulses without judgment, and choosing responses aligned with values, goals, and long-term harmony, because unchecked pride often escalates conflict, erodes relationships, and perpetuates unnecessary emotional turbulence, whereas deliberate, conscious responses enhance influence, strengthen connections, and preserve inner peace. And the chapter further explores how pride interacts with other emotions, such as anger, frustration, and fear, illustrating that when pride is triggered alongside these emotions, the intensity of reaction can multiply, creating a cascade of impulsive behaviors, and how awareness, mindfulness, and intentional choice break this cycle, enabling individuals to navigate emotionally charged situations with composure and strategic thinking. And the chapter highlights the role of self-awareness in recognizing patterns of pride-driven reactivity, noting that journaling, reflective practice, and honest assessment of past conflicts reveal recurring tendencies and triggers, providing the insight needed to intervene consciously in future situations. And by consistently practicing pause, reflection, and deliberate response, the individual gradually rewires habitual responses, cultivating resilience, patience, humility, and the capacity to act thoughtfully even in moments of provocation. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive pride into conscious self-expression, showing that the ability to pause before reacting, to observe emotions objectively, and to respond with wisdom rather than ego-driven impulses is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, leadership, and personal strength. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power does not lie in asserting superiority, defending identity, or reacting to perceived slights, but in the ability to maintain composure, respond intentionally, and uphold values under pressure. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing pride as it arises, to notice the subtle cues of ego-driven emotion, to pause, breathe, and reflect, and to choose actions that reflect clarity, humility, and conscious intentionality rather than automatic reaction, understanding that each deliberate choice strengthens emotional mastery, fosters resilience, preserves relationships, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting. And by consistently applying these principles, we develop the capacity to navigate life with dignity, insight, and lasting inner peace, demonstrating that the mastery of pride is not a denial of self, but the conscious exercise of choice, self-awareness, and emotional freedom, ultimately enabling the individual to respond to challenges with calm, intentional, and empowered action. Chapter 9. In this chapter, we examine the profound influence of disappointment on emotional reactivity, because disappointment, though often subtle, has the power to shape our responses, cloud judgment, and erode patience, self-esteem, and resilience. And understanding disappointment is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it arises when reality fails to meet expectations, when outcomes differ from hopes, or when people, circumstances, or situations fall short of what we envisioned. And the emotional response to disappointment can manifest as sadness, frustration, resentment, withdrawal, or even anger, each of which, if unobserved, can trigger reactive behaviors that damage relationships, impede decision-making, and prolong suffering. Yet by recognizing disappointment as it arises, we create a critical opportunity to pause, reflect, and respond with awareness rather than impulsively. And the chapter emphasizes that disappointment is not an enemy, but a signal, a reflection of expectations, desires, and values, providing insight into what matters most to us and where adjustments in perception, approach, or attitude may be necessary. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how disappointment manifests in daily life. A colleague fails to acknowledge your contributions, prompting feelings of hurt and irritation. A project does not yield the expected results, generating frustration and discouragement. A loved one forgets an important promise, sparking sadness or resentment. And in each of these scenarios, the instinctive reaction may be reactive criticism, withdrawal, or emotional outburst, whereas pausing to observe the rising emotions, reflecting on the underlying expectations, and choosing a measured, intentional response transforms the experience into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and emotional mastery. And the chapter delves and the chapter mechanisms behind disappointment, explaining how unmet expectations, habitual thinking, and attachment to specific outcomes amplify emotional intensity. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we gain the capacity to reframe experiences, adjust expectations, and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, because the mind often magnifies disappointment by focusing on loss, injustice, or unmet desires, creating a spiral of negative emotion that can cloud perception and prompt impulsive behavior. And the chapter provides practical strategies for managing disappointment, including mindfulness practices to observe emotions without judgment, cognitive reframing to shift perspective, reflective journaling to explore underlying expectations and values, and deliberate pauses to create space between emotion and action, all of which cultivate the ability to respond intentionally, maintain composure, and align actions with long-term goals. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over disappointment is not about denying emotion or suppressing feelings, but about observing them with clarity, acknowledging their presence, and exercising conscious choice in response. Because reactive behavior fueled by disappointment often perpetuates suffering, whereas deliberate, thoughtful responses preserve dignity, strengthen resilience, and foster constructive outcomes. And the chapter further explores the interplay between disappointment and other emotions, such as anger, frustration, and sadness, illustrating that disappointment often serves as the root from which these emotions grow, and how awareness, reflection, and deliberate action interrupt this chain, enabling individuals to maintain composure, clarity, and purpose even in challenging situations. And the chapter highlights the importance of perspective in managing disappointment, encouraging the listener to consider long-term goals, alternative outcomes, and the lessons embedded within setbacks, because this shift in perspective transforms disappointment from a source of reactive behavior into a guide for growth, learning, and adaptation. And by consistently practicing this approach, individuals gradually strengthen emotional resilience, cultivate patience, and develop the capacity to navigate life's challenges with wisdom and composure. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive responses to disappointment into thoughtful, intentional action, showing that the ability to pause, reflect, and respond consciously is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, leadership, and personal strength. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in avoiding disappointment or reacting impulsively, but in the ability to maintain inner calm, observe emotions, and act with clarity and purpose. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing disappointment as it arises, to notice the early signs of emotional response, to pause, breathe, and reflect on underlying expectations, and to choose intentional, thoughtful action over reactive behavior. understanding that each deliberate response strengthens mastery over emotions, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that the conscious management of disappointment is not merely a coping mechanism, but a pathway to emotional freedom, insight, and the enduring ability to navigate life with composure, clarity, and empowered choice. And through consistent practice, the listener learns to transform setbacks and unmet expectations into opportunities for growth, self-mastery, and the conscious exercise of emotional intelligence. Chapter 10. In this chapter, we examine the critical role of jealousy in triggering reactive behavior and undermining emotional composure, because jealousy, though often dismissed as a minor or fleeting emotion, possesses the power to cloud judgment, distort perception, and provoke impulsive reactions that can damage relationships, erode trust, and compromise personal integrity. And understanding jealousy is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it often arises when we perceive that someone else possesses advantages, opportunities, recognition, or resources that we desire, or when we fear that our own value, status, or relationships are threatened. And the emotional response to jealousy can manifest as resentment, bitterness, comparison, defensiveness, or attempts to control or undermine others, each of which, if left unchecked, can lead to destructive and impulsive behavior. Yet by observing jealousy as it emerges, we create the critical opportunity to pause, reflect, and respond intentionally rather than surrendering to automatic impulses. And the chapter emphasizes that jealousy is not inherently evil or unnatural, but a signal that highlights personal insecurities, unmet desires, or perceived gaps between expectations and reality. And by bringing these patterns into conscious awareness, we gain insight into the underlying causes of emotional turbulence, enabling us to redirect energy toward growth, self-improvement, and constructive action. And the chapter provides practical examples to illustrate how jealousy manifests in everyday life. A colleague receives a promotion or recognition, triggering envy and resentment. A friend achieves success, prompting comparison and feelings of inadequacy. A partner spends time with others, eliciting fear and possessiveness. And in each scenario, the reactive impulse may be gossip, criticism, withdrawal, or overcompensation, whereas pausing to observe the emotional surge, examining the underlying cause, and choosing a deliberate response transforms the experience into an opportunity for self-awareness, emotional mastery, and improved relationships. And the chapter explores the psychological mechanisms that intensify jealousy, including social comparison, fear of loss, low self-esteem, and attachment to outcomes. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we gain the capacity to respond with reason, self-compassion, and thoughtful action, because recognizing that jealousy is often rooted in internal perceptions rather than objective reality reduces its hold over our emotions and behaviors. And the chapter provides practical strategies for managing jealousy, including mindfulness practices to observe feelings without judgment, cognitive reframing to shift perspective from comparison to personal growth, gratitude exercises to focus on existing blessings and achievements, and self-reflection to address insecurities or unmet needs, all of which cultivate the ability to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over jealousy is not about suppressing desire, pretending feelings do not exist, or denying ambition, but about cultivating awareness, emotional regulation, and conscious choice, allowing us to channel energy constructively rather than destructively. And the chapter further illustrates how jealousy interacts with other emotions such as anger, fear, and frustration, often creating a feedback loop that amplifies reactivity, and how awareness, reflection, and intentional response break this cycle, enabling the individual to navigate challenging social and professional situations with composure, insight, and strategic thinking. And the chapter highlights the role of perspective and self-compassion in managing jealousy, encouraging the listener to recognize personal strengths, achievements, and values, and to focus on self-improvement and collaboration rather than comparison or competition, because this mindset shifts the emotional experience from reactive negativity to constructive engagement, and through repeated practice, the individual gradually strengthens emotional resilience, cultivates patience, and develops the capacity to maintain clarity and composure even when confronted with situations that might previously have triggered jealousy-driven reactions. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed jealousy into motivation, self-awareness, and empathy, showing that the ability to pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, personal strength, and relational mastery. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in controlling others, asserting superiority, or succumbing to envy, but in maintaining composure, observing emotions objectively, and choosing actions that align with long-term goals, integrity, and values. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing jealousy as it arises, to notice early physical and mental cues, to pause, breathe, and reflect on underlying fears and desires, and to respond intentionally with awareness, understanding that each moment of restraint strengthens emotional mastery, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that the conscious management of jealousy is not simply a coping mechanism, but a profound pathway to self-mastery, insight, and enduring emotional freedom, enabling the individual to navigate life's challenges, relationships, and opportunities with clarity, composure, and empowered choice, ultimately transforming what was once a reactive, destructive emotion into a source of understanding, growth, and deliberate, empowered action. Chapter 11. In this chapter, we explore the powerful influence of guilt and shame on emotional reactivity, because these emotions, though often internalized and subtle, have the capacity to shape thoughts, drive impulsive behavior, and compromise the ability to respond with clarity and composure. And understanding guilt and shame is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for they often emerge when we perceive that we have failed to meet personal or societal standards, when we believe we have caused harm, or when we feel judged or exposed in the eyes of others. And the emotional responses they provoke can include defensiveness, over-apologizing, withdrawal, self-criticism, or even lashing out at others, each of which, if unobserved, can escalate conflict, reinforce negative patterns, and impede personal growth. Yet by observing guilt and shame as they arise, we create the crucial space to pause, reflect, and respond intentionally rather than react impulsively. And the chapter emphasizes that these emotions are not inherently destructive, but signals that highlight areas of concern, moral values, or unmet expectations, offering an opportunity to understand ourselves more deeply, correct course, and act in alignment with integrity. And the chapter provides vivid examples of how guilt and shame manifest in everyday life. An employee feels guilty for missing a deadline and reacts defensively to criticism rather than calmly discussing solutions. A parent experiences shame over perceived inadequacies in raising a child, leading to overcompensation or frustration. A friend feels embarrassed about a social misstep, prompting withdrawal or resentment. And in each of these scenarios, the reactive behavior is driven by emotion rather than reason, whereas by pausing to recognize the physical sensations of tension, the racing thoughts, or the internal dialogue accompanying guilt or shame, the individual gains the ability to observe without judgment, assess the situation objectively, and respond thoughtfully, transforming emotional vulnerability into an opportunity for growth, reflection, and constructive action. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms underlying guilt and shame, explaining how past experiences, societal expectations, internalized beliefs, and self-criticism amplify these emotions and predispose individuals to reactive behavior. And by bringing these to conscious awareness, we gain the capacity to disentangle current circumstances from internalized judgments, fostering emotional resilience, self-compassion, and intentional response. Because recognizing that guilt and shame are often amplified by perception rather than absolute reality reduces their control over behavior and allows for deliberate, value-aligned action, and the chapter provides practical strategies for managing guilt and shame, including mindfulness practices to observe emotions without judgment, cognitive reframing to distinguish between responsibility and unnecessary self-blame, journaling to explore underlying beliefs and triggers, and deliberate breathing to anchor the mind and body, all of which cultivate the ability to act consciously rather than reactively. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over guilt and shame is not about denying mistakes, ignoring responsibility, or suppressing feelings, but about observing the emotions with awareness, acknowledging their presence, and choosing responses that reflect integrity, wisdom, and long-term goals, because reactive behavior driven by guilt or shame often perpetuates negative cycles, whereas deliberate, thoughtful responses preserve dignity, foster growth, and strengthen relationships. And the chapter further explores the interaction between guilt, shame, and other emotions such as fear, anger, and frustration, illustrating that these emotions often amplify each other, creating a complex web of reactive impulses, and how awareness, reflection, and intentional action break this cycle, enabling the individual to maintain composure, clarity, and purpose even in emotionally charged situations. And the chapter highlights the importance of perspective, self-compassion, and forgiveness in managing guilt and shame, encouraging the listener to recognize the distinction between constructive responsibility and self-punishment, to learn from mistakes, and to engage in corrective action without succumbing to reactive behaviors, because this approach transforms potentially debilitating emotions into catalysts for personal growth, learning, and emotional mastery. And through repeated practice, the individual gradually develops resilience, patience, self-awareness, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully even when guilt or shame arises unexpectedly. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive guilt or shame into deliberate, reflective action, showing that the ability to pause, observe, and respond consciously rather than react impulsively is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, integrity, and personal strength. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in avoiding mistakes, denying feelings, or reacting impulsively, but in maintaining composure, observing emotions objectively, and choosing actions aligned with values, ethics, and long-term well-being. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing guilt and shame as they arise, noticing early signs, pausing, breathing, reflecting on underlying causes, and responding intentionally with awareness, understanding that each deliberate choice strengthens emotional mastery, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that the conscious management of guilt and shame is not merely a coping strategy, but a profound pathway to self-mastery, clarity, and enduring emotional freedom, ultimately enabling the individual to navigate life, relationships, and challenges with composure, insight, and empowered deliberate action. Chapter 12. In this chapter, we examine the often underestimated role of anxiety in provoking reactive behavior and undermining emotional composure, because anxiety, though frequently dismissed as a common or minor emotional experience, has the power to influence thought patterns, distort perceptions, and trigger impulsive reactions that can compromise decision-making, relationships, and personal well-being. And understanding anxiety is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it typically emerges in anticipation of perceived threats, uncertainties, or challenges, prompting a cascade of physiological and mental responses, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, tension, restless thoughts, and a heightened sense of alertness, all of which prepare the body for action. Yet, when left unchecked, These responses often result in reactive, impulsive, or counterproductive behavior, and the chapter emphasizes that anxiety is not inherently destructive, but a signal that the mind and body are alert to potential danger, signaling areas that require attention, preparation, or adjustment, and by becoming aware of anxiety as it arises, we create the critical space to pause, observe, and respond deliberately rather than surrendering to automatic reactions. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how anxiety manifests in daily life. A professional anticipates a difficult meeting and reacts with irritability or avoidance. A parent worries excessively about a child's safety, leading to overprotectiveness or tension. A student faces an exam and experiences racing thoughts that trigger procrastination or hasty studying, and in each scenario, reactive behavior stems from the automatic response to perceived threat rather than conscious evaluation, whereas pausing to notice bodily sensations, racing thoughts, and emotional surges allows the individual to gain perspective, regulate response, and act with clarity and intention. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms underlying anxiety, explaining how habitual worry, negative thinking patterns, past experiences, and perceived lack of control amplify emotional intensity, and by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, individuals gain the ability to interrupt automatic cycles, reframe perception, and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively, because recognizing that anxiety is often a projection of imagined outcomes rather than absolute reality diminishes its power and frees the mind for intentional action. And the chapter provides practical strategies for managing anxiety, including mindfulness practices to observe thoughts and sensations without judgment, controlled breathing to stabilize physiological arousal, cognitive reframing to reinterpret perceived threats, visualization techniques to promote confidence and composure, and reflective journaling to explore triggers and patterns, all of which cultivate the capacity to respond consciously and deliberately, preserving emotional balance and composure. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over anxiety is not about suppressing emotion or pretending that challenges do not exist, but about observing sensations and thoughts with awareness, acknowledging their presence, and choosing responses that reflect reason, values, and long-term objectives, because reactive behavior driven by anxiety often escalates tension, impairs judgment, and perpetuates stress, whereas deliberate, intentional responses maintain clarity, strengthen resilience, and foster constructive outcomes. And the chapter further explores the interaction between anxiety and other emotions, such as fear, frustration, and impatience, demonstrating how these emotions often amplify each other and create cascading reactions, and how mindfulness, awareness, and deliberate choice disrupt this cycle, enabling individuals to navigate stressful situations with composure, insight, and strategic thinking. And the chapter highlights the importance of perspective and self-compassion in managing anxiety, encouraging the listener to distinguish between realistic threats and imagined ones, to recognize personal strengths and past successes, and to approach challenges with curiosity and problem-solving rather than panic, because this approach transforms anxiety from a reactive, paralyzing force into an instructive signal guiding preparation, reflection, and conscious action. And through consistent practice, the individual gradually develops emotional resilience, patience, self-awareness, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully even in high-pressure situations. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive anxiety into deliberate, intentional responses, showing that the ability to pause, observe, and act with awareness is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, personal strength, and relational mastery. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in succumbing to imagined threats, reacting impulsively, or avoiding challenges, but in maintaining composure, observing emotions objectively, and choosing actions aligned with values, goals, and well-being. And as the chapter concludes, The listener is invited to practice observing anxiety as it arises, noticing early signs of tension, thought patterns, and physiological arousal, pausing, breathing, and reflecting, and responding intentionally with clarity and insight, understanding that each moment of restraint strengthens mastery over emotions, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that conscious management of anxiety is not merely a coping strategy, but a profound path to emotional freedom, self-mastery, and the enduring capacity to navigate life, relationships, and challenges with composure, clarity, and empowered deliberate action. Chapter 13. In this chapter, we explore the intricate and often underestimated role of envy in influencing emotional reactivity, because envy, though commonly dismissed as a minor or fleeting feeling, has the power to distort perception, cloud judgment, and provoke impulsive reactions that can undermine relationships, personal integrity, and long-term goals. And understanding envy is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it often arises when we perceive that someone else possesses qualities, achievements, or opportunities that we desire, or when we feel that we are lacking in comparison, and the emotional response to envy can manifest as resentment, bitterness, competitiveness, or attempts to undermine others, each of which, if left unchecked, can escalate conflict, perpetuate negative thought patterns, and prevent constructive action. Yet by observing envy as it arises, we create the critical space to pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully rather than surrendering to impulsive behavior. And the chapter emphasizes that envy is not inherently destructive, but serves as a signal highlighting areas of personal desire, unmet needs, or perceived gaps between expectations and reality, offering insight into what matters most to us, and where adjustments in perspective, effort, or attitude may be beneficial. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how envy manifests in daily life. A colleague receives recognition or promotion, prompting feelings of inadequacy or competitiveness. A friend achieves success, sparking comparison and self-criticism. A family member excels in a skill or talent, triggering resentment or withdrawal. And in each scenario, the instinctive reaction may involve reactive behavior, such as criticism, gossip, avoidance, or passive-aggressive actions, whereas pausing to observe the arising emotion, reflecting on its source, and choosing a deliberate, value-aligned response transforms the experience into an opportunity for growth, self-awareness, and constructive action. And the chapter delves into lessons behind envy, explaining how social comparison, perceived scarcity, low self-esteem, and attachment to outcomes amplify its intensity and predispose individuals to reactive behavior. And by bringing these lessons into conscious awareness, individuals gain the capacity to interrupt automatic patterns, cultivate self-compassion, and redirect energy toward personal development rather than destructive reactions, because recognizing that envy often reflects internal perceptions rather than objective reality diminishes its control over our emotions and allows for intentional, thoughtful action. And the chapter provides practical strategies for managing envy, including mindfulness practices to observe feelings without judgment, cognitive reframing to focus on personal growth and gratitude, reflective journaling to examine triggers and recurring patterns, and goal setting to channel motivation toward constructive outcomes, all of which strengthen the ability to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over envy is not about denying desire, suppressing ambition, or ignoring achievements of others, but about cultivating awareness, self-regulation, and deliberate choice, allowing us to harness emotional energy in ways that enhance rather than hinder personal progress. And the chapter further explores the interaction between envy and other emotions such as jealousy, frustration, and resentment, illustrating how these emotions often compound each other, creating feedback loops that drive impulsive or destructive behavior, and how mindfulness, reflection, and conscious decision-making interrupt this cycle, enabling the individual to maintain composure, clarity, and ethical action even in socially or professionally challenging situations. And the chapter highlights the importance of perspective and gratitude in managing envy, encouraging the listener to focus on personal achievements, unique strengths, and opportunities for improvement, rather than comparing oneself to others, because this mindset transforms envy from a reactive, limiting force into a constructive signal for growth, learning, and self-improvement. And through repeated practice, the individual gradually develops emotional resilience, patience, self-awareness, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively in the face of envy. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive envy into motivation, empathy, and deliberate action, showing that the ability to pause, observe emotions, and respond consciously rather than react impulsively is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, personal strength, and relational mastery. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in succumbing to comparison, resentment, or reactive impulses, but in maintaining composure, observing emotions objectively, and choosing actions aligned with values, long-term goals, and integrity. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing envy as it arises, noticing early signs of emotional activation, pausing breathing, reflecting on underlying desires and insecurities, and responding intentionally with awareness, understanding that each deliberate choice strengthens mastery over emotions, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that the conscious management of envy is not merely a coping strategy, but a profound pathway to self-mastery, insight, and lasting emotional freedom, ultimately enabling the individual to navigate life, relationships, and challenges with composure, clarity, and empowered, deliberate action, transforming what was once a reactive and destructive emotion into a source of understanding, personal growth, and deliberate, empowered living. See chapter 14. In this chapter, we examine the profound impact of fear on emotional reactivity and the ability to maintain composure, because fear, while a natural and essential emotion for survival, can also dominate thought processes, distort perception, and trigger impulsive reactions that undermine decision-making, relationships, and personal growth. And understanding fear is essential to mastering the art of not reacting, for it often emerges when we anticipate danger, uncertainty, failure, or loss, prompting a cascade of physiological and psychological responses, including increased heart rate, rapid breathing, tension, heightened alertness, and racing thoughts, all of which prepare the body for immediate action. Yet when fear is unchecked or misinterpreted, it can provoke reactive behavior that is disproportionate, counterproductive, or destructive. And the chapter emphasizes that fear itself is not inherently negative, but a signal alerting us to potential threats, limitations, or areas requiring preparation, awareness, or caution. And by observing fear as it arises, we create the crucial space to pause, assess, and respond intentionally rather than surrendering to automatic impulses. And the chapter provides practical illustrations of how fear manifests in daily life. A professional faces the possibility of criticism and reacts defensively or avoids responsibility. A student anticipates failure and succumbs to procrastination or hasty work. A parent worries excessively about a child's safety, leading to overprotectiveness or stress-induced tension. An individual confronts an unexpected life challenge and responds impulsively rather than strategically, and in each scenario, the instinctive reaction is driven by fear rather than conscious evaluation, whereas pausing to notice the physical sensations, racing thoughts, and emotional surge allows the individual to gain perspective, regulate response, and act deliberately, transforming potentially paralyzing emotion into constructive, conscious action. And the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms underlying fear, explaining how past experiences, survival instincts, negative conditioning, and perceived threats amplify emotional intensity. And by bringing these mechanisms into conscious awareness, we gain the capacity to disrupt automatic fear-driven responses, cultivate self-confidence, and redirect energy toward rational, thoughtful action, because recognizing that fear is often based on perception rather than immediate reality diminishes its power over behavior and enables intentional, value-aligned responses, and the chapter provides practical strategies for managing fear, including mindfulness practices to observe sensations and thoughts without judgment, controlled breathing to calm physiological arousal, cognitive reframing to reinterpret threats, visualization techniques to promote confidence, and reflective journaling to explore triggers and recurring patterns, all of which foster the ability to act consciously rather than reactively. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery over fear is not about denying emotion, suppressing anxiety, or avoiding challenges, but about observing sensations and thoughts with awareness, acknowledging their presence, and choosing responses guided by wisdom, reason, and long-term goals, because reactive behavior driven by fear often exacerbates stress, impairs judgment, and perpetuates negative cycles, whereas deliberate, thoughtful responses maintain clarity, resilience, and constructive outcomes. And the chapter further explores the interaction between fear and other emotions such as anxiety, anger, and frustration, illustrating how these emotions can compound one another and generate cascading reactive behaviors, and how mindfulness, reflection, and conscious choice disrupt this cycle, enabling individuals to navigate threatening or high-pressure situations with composure, strategic thinking, and emotional balance. And the chapter highlights the importance of perspective, self-compassion, and courage in managing fear, encouraging the listener to distinguish between realistic threats and imagined dangers, recognize personal strengths and past successes, and approach challenges with curiosity and problem-solving rather than panic, because this approach transforms fear from a reactive, limiting force into a guide for preparation, learning, and intentional action. And through repeated practice, the individual gradually develops emotional resilience, patience, self-awareness, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully even in high-stakes or stressful circumstances. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have transformed reactive fear into deliberate, conscious action, showing that the ability to pause, observe emotions, and respond intentionally rather than impulsively is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, courage, and personal strength. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in succumbing to fear, reacting impulsively, or avoiding challenges, but in maintaining composure, observing emotions objectively, and choosing actions aligned with values, integrity, and long-term well-being. And as the chapter concludes, the listener is invited to practice observing fear as it arises, noticing early physical and mental cues, pausing, breathing, reflecting on the underlying cause, and responding intentionally with clarity and insight, understanding that each deliberate choice strengthens mastery over emotions, cultivates resilience, and deepens the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that conscious management of fear is not merely a coping strategy, but a profound path to emotional freedom, self-mastery, and the enduring capacity to navigate life, relationships, and challenges with composure, clarity, and empowered, deliberate action, ultimately transforming fear from a reactive obstacle into a powerful teacher and guide for conscious, intentional living. See Chapter 15. In this chapter, we explore the culmination of emotional mastery, focusing on the art of maintaining calm and composure in every circumstance, because achieving the ability to not react is not merely about controlling isolated emotions, but about cultivating a sustained, resilient mindset that allows for deliberate, thoughtful responses even under pressure. And understanding this principle is essential to mastering the power of emotional control, for it integrates all previous lessons on mindfulness, patience, pride, disappointment, jealousy, guilt, anxiety, envy, and fear, demonstrating how the conscious exercise of awareness transforms reactive tendencies into intentional, value-aligned action. And the chapter emphasizes that true mastery is not the absence of emotion, but the capacity to experience feelings fully while choosing responses that reflect reason, integrity, and long-term goals. Because in life, challenges, provocations, and uncertainties are inevitable, and the power to remain composed in the face of them defines personal strength, leadership, and inner peace. And the chapter illustrates through practical examples how this mastery manifests in daily life. A leader receives harsh criticism, yet responds with clarity and constructive guidance rather than defensiveness. A parent navigates a child's misbehavior with patience and empathy instead of anger. An individual faces unexpected setbacks at work and calmly reassesses priorities and solutions rather than reacting impulsively. And in each of these scenarios, the ability to pause, observe internal reactions, and respond intentionally transforms potential chaos into opportunity, demonstrating that composure is not passive, but an active, deliberate exercise of attention, reflection, and choice. And the chapter delves into the psychological and physiological mechanisms that enable sustained composure, explaining how consistent mindfulness practices, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and cognitive reframing strengthen neural pathways that support calm, clarity, and intentional action. And by cultivating these practices over time, individuals rewire habitual reactive patterns into intentional responses, enhancing resilience, decision-making, and interpersonal relationships. And the chapter provides practical strategies for consolidating emotional mastery, including daily mindfulness exercises to maintain awareness of thoughts and emotions, deliberate breathing to stabilize physiological responses, reflective journaling to examine triggers and progress, visualization to anticipate challenges and rehearse calm responses, and the application of gratitude and perspective to reframe potential stressors, all of which reinforce the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. And the chapter emphasizes that mastery of composure is not about suppressing emotions or denying their existence, but about observing them without judgment, understanding their source, and choosing actions aligned with values and long-term objectives. Because reactive behavior, even in seemingly small moments, can accumulate to erode relationships, trust, and personal integrity, whereas deliberate, intentional action builds character, influence, and lasting emotional stability. And the chapter explores the interplay of all previously discussed emotions, illustrating how mindfulness, self-reflection, and conscious choice break cycles of reactivity across pride, disappointment, jealousy, guilt, anxiety, envy, and fear, and how integrating these practices fosters a holistic approach to emotional regulation, enabling individuals to navigate complex, high-stress, or emotionally charged situations with composure, clarity, and strategic foresight. And the chapter highlights the importance of self-compassion, patience, and resilience in sustaining mastery, encouraging the listener to recognize that moments of reactive impulse are natural but not defining, and that each deliberate pause, observation, and intentional response reinforces neural patterns, strengthens emotional intelligence, and deepens the capacity to act in alignment with personal values, integrity, and long-term goals. Because mastery is a gradual, cumulative process rather than an immediate state. And the chapter provides illustrative stories of individuals who have embodied this mastery, showing that the consistent application of mindful awareness, intentional reflection, and thoughtful action enables them to maintain calm, navigate conflict effectively, build trust, and achieve goals without succumbing to destructive reactivity. And these examples reinforce the principle that true power lies not in external control, avoidance of emotion, or dominance over circumstances, but in the inner ability to observe, understand, and respond deliberately. And as the chapter concludes, The listener is invited to integrate all previous practices into a coherent daily approach, observing thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations, pausing to reflect before acting, choosing responses guided by reason, values, and long-term vision, and consistently applying mindfulness, patience, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence, understanding that each deliberate action strengthens mastery over emotions, cultivates resilience, and enhances the transformative power of not reacting, demonstrating that unregulation of one's inner world is the ultimate path to freedom, influence, personal growth, and enduring peace, ultimately empowering the individual to navigate life, relationships, challenges, and opportunities with clarity, composure, and deliberate, intentional action, and transforming the reactive mind into a source of conscious, empowered living that defines the essence of true emotional mastery.